It's when somebody understands who their authentic self is and isn't afraid to show it.
Welcome to the Unleashing Leaders podcast, where we work with willing leaders to accelerate the changes you seek. We'll learn from the experiences of different leaders facing real challenges and distill practical, purposeful steps to apply in your context. I'm Lee Scott, your curious co-pilot. Together, let's make positive changes for our companies and communities. Welcome back to the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Today, we are joined by quite the entrepreneurial stud, a great leader who's going to be sharing with us about really how do you harness the power of vulnerability and failing forward. And then also how do you build cohesion, even with distributed teams. We are joined today by Matt Tait. He is the CEO of Decimal, a powerful accounting and bookkeeping and business services firm based out of Indianapolis, Indiana. Matt is also the host of After the First Million, a podcast for entrepreneurs in terms of how do you scale your business past that first million in annual recurring revenue. Matt, it is great to have you on the show, dude.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm really looking forward to the conversation and just diving in today.
Well, excellent. Well, why don't you give our listeners a little bit of your backstory? You know, who is this Matt Tait? What's your superpowers and what's your kryptonite?
I have a lot more kryptonite than superpowers, so that'll be easy.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. So I think kryptonite is your superpower, right?
Well, like you said, I help run a company called Decimal, and we do bookkeeping and accounting for small businesses. And, you know, for us, we're about 4.5 years into that journey, and it's been a wild ride. We've gone from just two of us, my co-founder, Jacob Cloran, and I, to I think it's 82 people in 26 states and 4 countries. And we service about 750 clients. So we've grown a lot. And the irony of this whole thing is I am not an accountant. I cannot count past 10 with my shoes on. And I'm actually a recovering attorney, but this is also my third business. And I've done this a few times and really learned my way to an amazing team and an amazing business.
That is great. Well, you said this is your third round. You know, what was a little bit of your first 2 rodeos? And then we'll dive into what you've learned with and how you've applied it on the third time's a charm.
So for me, like I mentioned, I'm a recovering attorney. And after I got out of practicing law, I really wanted to swing the pendulum all the way to the right and got into the fast growing tech space. And after some years of just kind of learning the business and getting into some sales, I had the opportunity to combine my 2 careers and help somebody run a legal tech and services business. And that was a blast. It was a great learning experience running somebody else's company. And they did pretty well. And after that, I just said, hey, I want to run my own thing. Didn't really care what it was. Had a great idea in restaurant tech. It was a terrible business. Totally bombed and failed, but still have some great friends from it and certainly a ton of learning. And after that, I had the opportunity to go in-house at an accounting firm, a big accounting firm in Indianapolis that was a client at the past company. And they kind of asked me to come in as an entrepreneur in residence. They said, help us start things, be that creative person. And we started a bunch of different things. And one happened to be Decimal. And, you know, January 2020 was an awesome time to start a business for like 45 days.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a killer start, literally.
I mean, it was one of those where it was like start here, dip down, and then luckily for us, we had the opportunity to buy it from them. And it was right before all of the growth happened. And ultimately, we love the idea. We're on a mission just to make it easier to be a business. There are a lot of hard things about running a company. And we wanted to find something that was just boring that people have to do. And bookkeeping and tax is super boring, but you have to do it or the government comes after you and you fail.
Yeah, no. And then you end up just blowing more of what you work so hard to get unnecessarily, right? Well, you know, Matt, what's fascinating about your story, a couple of things that I think stick right out is, first of all, your first business, you start where I think a lot of people think they should start, right? You know, something that you're technically proficient at, right? That you're taking a new spin on, right? You know, attorney services, with a tech twist, right? So you're playing to your technical strengths and trying to, build something, grow something based on your own knowledge. right? And that's a very comfortable place to start. But like you said, that can also really limit your impact as a leader. Your second one, I think, is the most second common place people start, which is in order to be a leader, you got to be totally innovative and outside the box and radical and never before seen, kind of a thing, breaking ground. And that's a really good way to break your face, break your nose, break your knees, right? And just get beat up. And your third one is like, okay, I want a, business that has an impact, but you're going boring, right? Like you're just like, this is something that sounds so mundane, but yet it has such a broad customer base, and it's done really, frankly, poorly in many cases, especially for those small businesses, right? They're not large enough to get the big firms, but they've got all the headaches and the problems of it. They need and they're so nimble and growing, and it's not your technical area of expertise. Right. So now you're exposed. You the only thing you got now, aside from your good looks, is leadership. Right. Like, I'm not the technical expert. I'm not the guy you escalate, accounting questions to. I think you joked with me when we were talking earlier. You're like, I'm not even allowed access to our own systems, right? And nor should I. But now it's just raw. It's like, it's lead or die. There's nothing else to differentiate. And yet I think that's exactly where the power of leadership comes in. So I think that's really amazing that, you got there through trial and error, that the rest of us are just trying to do because that's what we inherited. So love the courage, love the learning. So tell me a little bit more about, you've scaled this business from the dark days of January 2020 to, like you said, over 80 employees, half the country, multiple countries, right? You've done some M&A, so you've acquired as well too. Tell us about how to scale, especially when you've got all these remote distributed teams, because it makes sense, right? Your teams need to be, more proximal in geographical time zones and whatnot. There's plenty of advantages to that. But tell us about the challenge of scaling while remote.
Number one is realizing as a leader that there are things that you just suck at, and that's totally okay. I always joke that I'm really, really good at talking people into jumping off a bridge. I'm really terrible at getting them to line up to do it. And so I have to find leaders and partners who are better than me at doing the organizational stuff, at making sure that we put the processes in place. It's one of the reasons why I even started the After the First Million podcast, and you and I have talked about this, is because the superpowers that get you to 1 million, oftentimes the stuff that gets you to 10 are all the things that you hate, the things you don't want to do, the processes, the HR, like all this stuff that you just have to do. But really, when I pull back your question, the ultimate answer that I would give is, number one, being people first. I have lucked into an amazing team at every single level of the company, from the newest employee to the most senior COO and co-founder. We have a great team that works really well together and that really genuinely cares about each other. And we've built that the entire time. And whether it was, tell this story, pandemic hits, and it's me and Jacob, and we had our first hire, Katie, and we have an intern, Sam, both of whom are still with the business. We get into it a month, and Katie's significant other gets into a terrible accident, is in a coma in the hospital for a long time. She's the only accountant on staff. So think about all the stuff that we have to do with the only accountant on staff. And she's also happens to be in Indianapolis, where I am and where Jacob was at the time. Jacob is no longer in Indy. He's younger than us, and so he can do cool things and live all over the world. But what we did was Jacob's parents were watching Katie's kids, and I'm sending food, and we're helping at the hospital. We just leaned in and did that. And what that did is that ingrained into the rest of the company. We've had employees in the Philippines whose spouses needed open heart surgery, and we started GoFundMe campaigns that were entirely filled by the rest of the company. That is just who we've become and who we are as a business. And that kind of people first approach has even taken hold in acquisitions and how we do acquisitions, how we think about acquisitions. But then it's also, when it comes to the remote aspect, that's stuff that you can also do in an office. When it comes to the remote aspect, you have to be more intentional about everything. I joke with friends of mine that have offices with great companies, and I'm like, hey, you're lucky. You can lazily build a great culture simply by being around each other.
Yeah. It'll happen with just osmosis, right? Kinetic proximity, bounce it in, like you said, you can do it. I mean, they still take some intention, it's not saying it's ever easy, but it's a lot easier, right? When you have that, frequent light touch punching around.
Well, and you can walk behind somebody at their desk and see that they're having a bad day or see that they're having a good day. Like you can just read that better. And in a remote business, you don't have that opportunity on a daily basis. And so you have to manufacture and be intentional about creating connection points. And what we talk about is building bridges between the islands that are each of us. We all exist on an island, and it's our job.
And sadly, Matt, I mean, you can have people who are an island in a building that's got a cubicle farm with 1,000 people. They can feel just as isolated, just as alone, just as disconnected. Right. But just now we know, we have to be a little intentional with our efforts to find out what's going on and make those bridges.
I think you're totally right. And, I think what works in an office doesn't work well remote. What works well remote works great in an office. It's an interesting dichotomy that exists out there. But what's also interesting, and you've seen this in your business, is when I was the CEO of a 20, 30 person company, I knew everybody. I knew everything about them. I can personally be the one that creates culture on a daily, weekly basis.
Yeah, you're manifesting it through your behaviors every day. Yep.
Right. At 80, I rely on my directors, my managers, my COO, my individual contributors. I rely on the whole cascade of the company to set the values and maintain the values of Decimal. And that gets to my final point of what I think is a core pillar of success in a remote business. And that is the importance of not only having company values and key behaviors, but living them, talking about them, being them, existing as them, judging for them, even compensating based on them.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love, how you're really talking about integrating it because, 25 years ago when I started in this business, the concept of even having named values was just completely foreign and nobody had it, right? Just what a waste of time and a bunch of fluff. Now, most organizations, again, to your point, that are over that, 2030 mark, they might have something that's on a wall or some statement or some marketing slick that they have it. But what you're talking about here, which I think is really the power, is how do you get your middle generation of leaders to be able to really, echo, promote, hire, compensate, develop around those. So would you be willing to share, Matt, with one of our listeners, like what's one of your current values that you guys have developed as a team? And what are some ways that those directors or frontline supervisors can really, emphasize and focus and make that real in a couple of the ways that you mentioned just now?
So our number one value is do the right thing. Number 2 is default to transparency. 3 is move fast, make things better. And 4 is win together. So they roll off the tongue. They're very easy to say.
I like how they're mini expressions, right? It's not just, fairness and fast and, fun, right? It's like they're little sayings. So they give you a mini story to play with. So by the way, a nice job on that. So didn't interrupt you. Sorry about that, Matt. Yeah.
No, you're just fine. What we've also layered into these values is key behaviors that define them. And so a great example would be in do the right thing. One of the key behaviors that we have at Decimal is we will be the most responsive partner you've ever dealt with. And so we talk about, we measure, we report on responsiveness in our platform, responsiveness in email, responsiveness on Zoom. Like we value responsiveness. And that is a behavior of do the right thing.
Got it. So you took a value, you named a specific way to manifest that through a behavior, and then you reinforce that with measurements that showcase and say, we're paying attention to that. We're all looking at that, and we all are creating that with our everyday actions, right? Fantastic alignment there, Matt.
The other thing, default to transparency. We talk a lot about the bargain that we strike with each other. The bargain I strike with my team is I am going to provide you with Are they a great company to work for, a safe place to be, and a place where you can hopefully grow and call a career? Your job is to do really great work, to highlight when you have problems, and to work with us as a team to improve the whole. So we talk about a lot of that in transparency. My job is to lead with transparency. So we will lead with, we'll do company meetings, all hands. We'll do hey, here are the financials, here are this. We will also have a section usually where I like to talk about my mistakes. And we will talk about this in manager meetings. We'll talk about it in directors meetings. But I spend a significant amount of time talking about how I screw up regularly. We joke about it and it's fun, but it's also because that's transparency and it gives everybody else. If the boss is transparent about sucking at things, it's okay for me to. It's okay for me to talk about it. And that's also the type of culture that we're trying to build. And it's also a funny way. Like I've been called irreverent at times, but I like to.
I can tell why you and I are jamming. Yeah, that's a badge of pride. You put that on my gravestone, and I'm not going to be hurt at all.
Oh yeah. So we like to really work through this. The other thing that we do is we use Slack, and one of the things we do on Slack is we have a kudos channel where people can give props for somebody doing something great. Well, in order to do that, they have to tag a company value. So somebody did something great. Well, what value or what values was that demonstrating? And in all hands, we highlight those as well. So that's how we've really stitched it together. And I'll tell you really like, you know, as a CEO, you occasionally have those stories that you're like, I'm going to be telling this for the next 50 years. We had an intern this summer, JJ, student at Butler University here in Indianapolis. And in JJ's last week, I did an exit interview. I wanted to hear what he thought of the experience, how we could do better, and then just genuinely tell him he did an awesome job. And if there's anything he needed going forward, I was happy to help.
Yeah. You had his back, right? That's part of the bargain, right? You know, I'm going to give you a great learning experience. You're going to contribute while you're here. And then I can be a platform for your future career, right? That's back to that bargain you said. So what did JJ say in this exit interview, man?
He said, you know, what was really cool about my summer is I can tell you every single one of Decimal's values because everybody repeated them to me all the time. And he said, I think as I go back to business school, I am the only intern in any company that will go back and can say that. And I think that's really, really cool. And I was like, you got me. Now you definitely have a reference. You had it before, but you get a really good one.
Definitely
now.
Got it now. Yeah. Because, you know, again, we talk so much about, is it about the technique? Is it about the knowledge? And to your point, it's about character behavior, right? You know, first, that's the foundation. And when that foundation is fertile, and in your case, also aligned around those values, then the skills and the knowledge and the techniques can all grow and blossom. But yeah, you got to know what they are. And one of the things you mentioned is when you first develop these 4 values, I think this is a key distinction. Again, many people have them. Very few people actually name the behaviors, reinforce them, embed them. But you tell us what you did with the first 4 values that you you said, hey, here's 4 great values, but there was something they all had in common. What was it that they had in common? And why did you use that to signal how you guys are going to do it differently?
So going back a little bit, we didn't actually create company values till about 2 years into the business, maybe a year and a half. We wanted to see who we are, and we wanted the values to be partially a reflection of that and partially aspirational. So when we had it was a leadership offsite. I got the leadership team together and I said, it's time for us to spend a whole day and a half on creating values and key behaviors. And so I'm going to come up with some examples. I came up with some great examples. Few companies, here are their values, started talking about them. These are awesome. It's amazing. They were all companies that had totally imploded, like Enron or Scale Factors in our space. And so everybody was like, oh. And then I paused and I kind of let it sink in. And I said, our values will be real, they will be lived, or they won't exist. And so as we create our own, I do not want to create these values. I want to create ours. And that was, I think, a big turning point for everybody.
Powerful, powerful. Yeah. You know, and it's, you know, people are like, well, what are the right values? And you're like, it's less about the right values and more about doing the values right. It's making sure, like you said, they will be lived and they will be real, or they're not going to be there. All right. And it doesn't have to be everything for everybody, right? You guys have an identity. You guys have something that's unique to you, something that attracts some people to you, and probably some that turn people off. And you're like, that's fine. Don't be here. Again, that's part of that bargain. Well, you mentioned demonstrating the, do things in a transparent way by sharing dumb things that Matt has done. What's a dumb thing Matt has done recently? You wouldn't mind sharing to 16,000 of our closest friends.
Oh, man, there's so many. It's funny. I will actually talk about like dumb things I do at home too, like with my kids or with my wife. I forget something. And the other day I totally bought a one-way trip ticket for my family for a vacation and forgot to buy the other way. Luckily, we had plenty of flights back and it was great, but like, sort of screwed that one up.
Kind of messed up. Wife's like, honey, you planning something that you haven't told me about? You're like, we're never coming back.
And I am untrustworthy on planes. And my wife found it out on her honeymoon. We went to Bermuda for our honeymoon, and for the flight back, we show up at the airport and we realized the plane had left a couple hours ago. And they had sent me an email letting me know that the plane was changed. But because I was unplugging, I did not check my email. So those are like tongue in cheek we talk about.
I think I have a similar affliction. I'm very fortunate. My wife's brother is an air traffic control, guy, and she is, has all the same genes of being an air traffic controller. So she's able to route and navigate and, juggle across time zones. And I'm just like, baby, take the wheel, right? Like I will, it will be an adventure and we'll get back. Like I'm resourceful and I'm resilient and I'll fix it. But like, how about we just not break it in the first place? And she's like, yeah, you do your thing. I'll do mine.
Oh, 100%. So those are the types of things that I'll laugh about. But company wise, a good example, we bought a company this summer, and the process of going through that got a little bumpy towards the end. And I sent a company-wide email explaining why we were actually going to back out of the acquisition. And I attributed it to some company values, doing the right thing. And it was, I very much would stand by that email. Well, if I would have waited 4 days to send that email, I would have realized that they came back and apologized, and we ended up going through the deal. It ended up making it a better deal for us. But it meant that when we had an all hands, we talked about why, everybody's like, hey, you really leaned on the company value here. Like, what changed? And so I told them, I was like, you know what? I probably over communicated in that. And I explained why and how we got there and all that. And everybody understood. Like, we've got a really great team that totally got it. But I was like, you know what? I should have been a little more patient with my communications with you all. And I need to think about, me being transparent. And it's another conversation we have. It's sometimes these values overlap.
Yeah. Oh, of course. Yeah. Doing the right thing and being transparent are, part and parcel. Do the right thing in silence and nobody sees it,
Well, and sometimes they can conflict too. There are times when being transparent, and I talk about this team, doesn't mean I'm going to share everything. There are things I'm just not going to share that aren't good for you to hear. And like you get it, running a business, like sometimes you're on the razor's edge, and like back in the day, we lent money to the company. Well, if I'd have told everybody that, everybody would have left. And we got through it, like we had a plan around it, but there is just certain things that we shouldn't share. And there are certain things that we should.
There's things that are just, confidential, not appropriate to be disclosed, that other employees wouldn't want it if they were in those shoes, right? I use the analogy to say, hey, a window is transparent, but it doesn't mean it lets everything through, right? It lets the light through and you can see what's going on and you can see if there's a storm out there, but, it does buffer you from the wind, right? You don't need to feel every breeze because, that just becomes noisy and chaotic. But yeah, we can see what's going on and we see where we're going. That's transparency. Otherwise, it's just, if there's no filter, there's no buffer, right? That's almost a little too raw. So yeah, that's an analogy I've used sometimes. Well, you're not being transparent. You're not telling me what so-and-so salary is. I'm like, that's none of your damn business, well, so that anchors it and you're reinforcing it and you're doing it, at scale. And another thing you talked about is the chemistry happens, through the way that people work on their day-to-day assignments and interact with clients. So you had a great expression around, the way you really build cohesion, even across a remote workforce. It isn't about, having a ping pong table. There's other ways to get there. So tell us a little bit about how you also build that cohesion with these virtual teams.
I think ultimately it doesn't matter if you're in an office or not. Like, culture is built by working together and solving problems together. And, we're in a business and services industries. When you provide a professional service for people, a lot of times people think about that on a one-to-one basis, like one service provider, one client. And what that also does is that puts a lot of risk and problems and all of that stuff into the mix too. You kind of luck out or you don't. So what we've done is and this is also part of scaling. We're in a business that doesn't scale well. It's one of the reasons we got into it is because we uniquely thought we were suited to helping it scale beyond where most people can.
Yeah, because your typical accounting firm, right? Bookkeeping firm is, one city, handful of bookkeepers, clients in that location. Big zero done, that's it, right? And you guys are like, hey, that's a way to do it, but we're not limited by that.
No, and I think we really wanted to come at it in a way that could help the industry raise the water level. And I think we're helping to do that. But one of the ways internally that we do this, and going back to your question on culture and that shared work, is we put everybody into very small teams. And they're in a team structure so that if a client has some need, yeah, they may have a main point of contact, maybe you, but I'll also pop in here and I may answer some emails and I may pop in and take a meeting. It also means that my team can take vacations. And we exist, like, there's a super weird thing. Like, you want to know how messed up accounting is? Like, tax season. It's the only business that people measure your longevity by tax seasons, not by annual years. And it's because tax season traditionally is just this horrendous.
Just fries you. Yeah.
That first employee, Katie, had a great story where she told us a story. She said, the year before I joined Decimal, it was tax season. And bookkeepers have to not only file taxes, but clean up books and also do their regular stuff. So they're the worst position out of all of them. And Katie was like, she had 2 young kids, twins. And she's like, I came downstairs one day and I realized that all of my dishes were piled in the sink. I had no time to clean them. And so I called my mom and I said, Mom, can you help? And she loaded all of her dishes into a laundry basket, dropped it at her mom's on the way to work, picked it up at 8:00 that night, all clean. And she's like, that was tax season. And I'm like, that's just like, there's a lot to unpack of wrong.
Yeah.
And so, we used to do marketing for hiring, and we used to have our team post things on LinkedIn where they'd be on a beach during tax season, or they'd be at a lake, or, they're just doing something fun that they could do and saying like, hey, y'all are struggling during tax season. Like, life's good for us. But that's where sharing the pain also makes it so people can take vacations.
Well, it's even on a monthly basis, right? You're trying to close the books, you're trying to close the quarter, you're doing quarterly filings, and like those things are so rhythmic and time bound. It's just like, our CFO, we joked for a while. It's like, her birthday was during one of those, it's in tax season, in the middle of one of those things. And she was like, I will never be able to do anything on my birthday. And we were like, well, crap. That's not going to be the case. We're going to build systems. We're going to build processes, and you're going to be able to take a couple weeks of vacation, overseas, unplug, right? And we're going to handle it. And I think being able to have that as a goal, and back to your point, building the systems and the processes and having that pod-based resource pool to handle it, right? That's how you're people first, right? Literally. And it's not like it can't be done. It absolutely can. It just requires a little ingenuity and a little collaboration.
Well, and it requires the systems to do it. And I think that there are a lot of professional services businesses. If you don't think about scaling correctly, you don't put the systems that make that possible together. Or you put systems in place that create more work to try to save work, and then you just created more work. And so there's a whole host of layering that you have to do very, very intentionally.
Well, I like to, in our line of work, we look at processes, right? And we're often working with mid to large size clients, and we're trying to help them undo some of that bureaucracy, right? To your point, they created a system that helped them when they were, 30 years ago. Now that same system has become a chronic impediment. And so we're having to dislodge and redesign it. But the idea is at any level of scale that you're operating, there's always a bottleneck. There's always something that is your limit to growth. And it's always one thing at that point in time. It's not 100, right? Like you said, it might be starting up, like marketing's our bottleneck. We just don't have enough, people lining up to jump off the bridge that I could sell them on. Okay, we got people lining up, but we're not selling. Okay, we're selling, but we don't have the people to lead the work. We have people to lead the work, we don't have people to do the work. We don't have the systems to support the people doing the work. It's like, it will always be, and then it circles back around and it scales and it bounces around. But to your point, just being able to say, hey, at this point in our evolution, our key limit to growth, or maybe growth isn't the goal. Maybe our key limit to raising the bar in our customer experience, for example, right? Or increasing our profitability is like, there's something that's getting in the way of that. And yeah, if we just swarm around that, focus on that, we address that, great. We go to a new level. Doesn't mean we're solved. Just means we now have the next one to work on. So I think that is a way of thinking. And again, you've taken it and repeated that process 30 some odd times with pods all across these states and across these countries.
Well, and I think that too comes to something we were talking about earlier, and that's bringing on, my job as CEO is to bring on people that are smarter and better than me, period. I can sometimes conceptualize good things, but I am very, very bad at actually implementing them. And having a great team is what has allowed us to do that. And look, to be fair, having good people at all levels that are willing to work with us, willing to try new things, willing to fail, willing to change, that's what allows us to get better. And not everybody is like that.
No, absolutely not. So what's something that you could share with our listeners then around how you sniff out those folks? And like you said, the key here is they've got to be smarter than you. So I think the traditional interview selection process is you're an expert in a thing, right? And you throw out an ad recruitment and then they show up and then you evaluate them on their expertise based against your expertise, right? You've been a CPA for 10 years, you're hiring a new CPA. You've been an attorney, you're hiring an attorney or a paralegal. You're a welder and you're hiring a junior, a tradesman for that, right? But to our point that we started this conversation with, leadership is not dependent on you being the most technically proficient. So what are some ways that you sniff out talent and know that this one is going to fit and grow and contribute, not just fit, but actually contribute, versus this one, man, the resume looks great, but yeah, not the dog that's going to hunt.
So I'll give you a really good example of Michael, our COO. So Decimal has 3 people in leadership that are incapable of doing the accounting work for our clients. So that's also an interesting, odd part of us as a company is the top 3 people in the business are incapable of actually operating the business itself.
Yeah, but that's just it. You're not the operators, right?
No, it's very much not our job to do the day-to-day work, but it's our job to make it so that the people that do have the easiest, most proficient way of accomplishing it and are happiest doing it. When I hired Michael, I was looking for somebody to help run a new acquisition. We bought a company from KPMG, and I wanted to run it as a sidecar business for a little bit and then integrate it over time. Best laid plans, or as Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. That integration happened in 3 months instead of 18, but I brought Michael on and I even we're venture backed. So I have a venture board member, and even they kind of questioned it because Michael had been the CEO at 3 tech companies before coming to Decimal. And I was looking for an operator. And they were like, hey, are you sure you want to bring another CEO in? That sounds like maybe he wants your job or whatever. But I sat with Michael and I asked him and I said, what are you passionate about? And I said, here's some of the problems. Here's what we're thinking about. He goes, you know what? I'm passionate about solving a problem. And this is a problem that nobody solved well. And I think it should be able to be solved. And I'm at a point in my career where I don't ever want to deal with a board again. I don't ever want to be the CEO again. I'm just done. I want to operate a business. He goes, eventually, I want it to be so that you are operating the company and I'm operating the business. And it took about a year or so to get there, but we got there, and that's exactly where we ended up. And it's been an amazing partnership, and adding him in with Jacob, my co-founder, and I. But I hired based on pushing him in the interview process, not just personally, but professionally. Hey, here's what we deal with. How would you deal with it? I wanted to see his brain work and how he was solving problems. And I wanted to push him. And I said, hey, I'm going to get pushback. They're going to say, why are you bringing another CEO in here? What's your answer to that? And he goes, well, he gave me the answer. And I finally looked at my board and I said, look, here's the thing. If he ends up being a better CEO than me, we all win. My ego is perfectly fine with wherever we get to, but honest to God, I think we're going to make a good team that's going to complement each other well. And I think where he's failed as a CEO is not having that complementary partner. And where I can grow as a CEO is having that complementary partner. And that's been a really good thing.
That's beautiful. Well, if I can extract out a couple of things I heard in there, Matt, for our listeners who may or may not be hiring an ex-CEO to play a COO role, right? But the principles are the same. A couple things you did there. One, you had them describe their passion. And I absolutely, my first screen is like, what do you want? What is your dream? What is the ideal scenario for you? What are your strengths and how would you most like to apply them? I think we often assume we go in, we just start with like, well, hey, can you do, process X or can you do function Y? And somebody's desperate enough to get a job. Their answer is going to be yes, right? With the weird tone in their voice. And then it's all about discovering if they're able. And I like to start with what they want to do. What are they passionate about, right? And sometimes I've been in conversation with folks and they're describing their passion. And I'm just like, hey, that is a really awesome passion. And I am very supportive of that. And that's not what we need right now. And they're like, but I could do that job. I'm like, I wasn't asking who can do this job. I want to know who is it that God put on this earth who has a burning desire to do this job. Because even if you don't have the skill now, if you come with that level of passion, you're going to get it. But if you've got the skill and you don't have the passion, you're just going to settle in it at best, right? So starting with the want, I really like that. And I'll ask them, what's your dream? What do you want? And that's what you did. What was your passion? And then the other thing is like, okay, present them with the challenging parts, right? Lead with the adversity, lead with the challenges, lead with why it kind of sometimes sucks. It may not be the best thing, right? So you're not trying to sell them. You're trying to, pressure test them a bit. And I think that also, and then having them answer it lets you know, do they have the gumption or the resilience to be able to overcome the invariable bad days and setbacks. So I like the two elements that you described in that example. And I think you can apply that to when you're hiring an intern, when you're hiring your first bookkeeper or accountant, right? If you're hiring a vendor, same thing. It's like, what are you guys passionate about? And then, when the going gets tough, what do you guys do? I think those are great screening conversations for any relationship.
Well, and I think we're just having this conversation as we're doing some hiring right now. And I said, you know what? If they're not asking a lot of good depth questions, I'm out. Anybody can ask the very easy, like, tell me about you, give me more ideas on what you do, like blah, blah, blah. Great. You know what? Welcome to the set of questions you could ask anybody, and it's not unique. I want to know people that are thinking intuitively about the business, thinking through what it would be like to work in the position they have, and asking those deeper questions because it means that they're curious. And curiosity is such an important aspect and skill set in any role.
Well, I'm glad you think so, Matt, because that happens to be one of our core values. And it's kind of an unusual one, but yeah, we're like, we'd rather be learning than be right is kind of the way we describe it. So it's like, hey, I want to be curious. I want to have a beginner's mind, because that's what's going to open up those innovative pathways. Well, Matt, this some great insights on, how a leader can be successful and strong through vulnerability, through humility, through sharing those examples. I loved how you shared about how do you, be able to scale by breaking things down into replicatable parts. But then the thing that holds it all together are those behavior-backed values. that really create that identity wherever you are. And then working in those pods. I think that's, having the work be inherently team-based is how you create teamwork, right? If you got a basketball team, I don't care how many team building activities you do. If you just have one guy shooting free throws and another guy's over here just running laps and they never get on the court to play a game together, they're not going to be a great team. So a lot of really, really good nuggets here. Well, Matt, thank you for helping us all ask some questions and see some examples about how we can become more authentic and more courageous in how we show it today. I really appreciate that message. Where can our listeners find out more about you, stay in touch with you, follow your progress as you continue to scale this very relevant and necessary business enterprise?
Well, Lee, I really appreciate you having me on. This has been an awesome conversation. And honestly, if anybody wants to follow me, we've got a great podcast, After the First Million. It's on Apple and Spotify. And follow me on LinkedIn. You will find a very irreverent posting style.
Well, you're being authentic. So doesn't necessarily mean it was PC and you're going to always like it, but it is authentic. Well, Matt, thank you again for taking a little time out of your very busy schedule to share some great insights that I think whether you're a small business out there trying to break through that first million, or you're a leader in a large organization, but you're running it like an entrepreneur, right? Like you did early in your career. These are all things that are very practical and applicable to those situations. So thanks again for being on the show, Matt.
Thank you for joining us today on the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Subscribe so you don't miss a moment that could be the key to your next breakthrough. Let's stay connected and contribute together by grabbing that @UnleashingLeaders handle on LinkedIn, YouTube, or your favorite network. This is Lee Scott. Keep learning, loving, and leading. Our future and our communities are counting on us.